Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro went to the Supreme Court of Justice and filed a writ of protection before the electoral chamber of said court to validate the elections of July 28. Funeral processions began in Tehran on Thursday for the head of the Politburo of the Palestinian Hamas movement, Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed on Wednesday in an attack on his residence in Iran. And the government of Colombia confirmed its intention to continue the dialogue with the National Liberation Army to fulfill the commitment to seek the protection of the civilian population. Hello and welcome to From the South. My name is Belén de los Santos. I'm from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro went on Wednesday to the Supreme Court of Justice and filed an appeal of protection before the electoral chamber of said court to validate the election of July 28th. He was received by the president of the highest court, Magistrate Carlotta Rodriguez, also president of the electoral chamber, to whom he handed the document. He did so in company of the general prosecutor of the Republic, Reinaldo Muñoz. The writ is for the electoral chamber to address this attack on the electoral process and make clear everything that needs to be clarified. President Maduro pointed out that 100% of the tally sheets of the past elections will be made available. He affirmed that he is willing to publicly present all the tally sheets of the votes cast in the elections, the results of which are disputed by the extremist opposition. In this context, President Nicolas Maduro called on the people to defend the country's peace from the violence that the Venezuelan extreme right wing wants to perpetrate. From the People's Balcony at the Miraflores Palace, President Maduro asked the Venezuelan people to resume their daily and commercial activities, alleging they would be safe under the watch of the citizen security forces. In this sense, the head of state expressed his rejection of what he described as intentions of the Venezuelan ultra-right wing and its U.S. allies to establish radical neoliberalism in the country through citizen violence. Also, Maduro announced that in Venezuela there would be justice against the more than 1,000 people arrested by the security forces that provoked acts of violence in the country.
But we're going to repair all the damage. We're going to heal the wounds that they created. And with justice, we're going to consolidate the peace of Venezuela, the peace for everybody in Venezuela, the peace of all Venezuelans, men and women. And the working class will be united, working.
Meanwhile, on Wednesday, the Attorney General of Venezuela, Tarek William Saab, addressed the actions of far-right groups who he accused of seeking to tarnish the results of the elections. In the meantime, William Saab pointed out that as they had been warning for months, there were plans of the extreme right wing to declare the election as a fraud after July 28th and begin with terrorist acts throughout the nation. On the other hand, William Saab pointed out that the public ministry is investigating each of these criminal groups and assured that 20 subjects were apprehended for crimes that included attacks on military officials. Furthermore, he also emphasized that the far right is using a structured group of organized crime known as El Tren del Llano, associated to paramilitary groups. A group of international observers reaffirmed transparency in Venezuela's presidential elections, as well as the effectiveness of the electoral system. The joint preliminary reports highlighted the normality of the electoral process and full guarantee of the citizens' right to vote in peace and in an organized manner, for which they recognized the work of the National Electoral Council. They further praised the Republic plan for thoroughly conducting the citizen security and the custody of the electoral material without any kind of incidents. Likewise, they congratulated the Venezuelan people who, despite multiple pressures and interfering actions, gave an example of civility during the peaceful, orderly, and transparent exercise of the right to vote. The Argentine and American Jurist Associations, the Chilean Human Rights Commission, among other organizations, denounced the siege of the Venezuelan embassy in Buenos Aires, which they described as unacceptable violation of the Vienna Convention. In this context, the Cuban government also condemned the interference position of some member countries of the Organization of American States, who met in a permanent council with the purpose of analyzing the presidential elections in Venezuela. Precisely, Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs specified through an official statement on its X account that Cuba denounces the irresponsible attempts to resort to violence and destabilization with the aim of producing a coup in Venezuela. Now let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In Iran, thousands of people attended a funeral ceremony to honor Hamas Palestinian leader Ismail Haniyeh, assassinated by the Israeli regime in an attack against his residence in Tehran. On Thursday, the supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, led the prayers to bid farewell to the political leader and his bodyguard, Wasim Abu Shaban. Their remains were draped with the Palestinian flag during the ceremony held in the courtyard of the Tehran University, which was attended by the president-elect Masoud Pezeshkian, senior Iranian military, and officials from the resistance movement. Ismail Haniyeh was in the Iranian capital to participate in the inauguration of the new president, which took place on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, thousands of people in Iraq, Turkey, and Morocco went to the streets to condemn the assassination of the leader of the Palestinian resistance, Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, and in support of Palestine, a nation under constant attack since October 7th last year. In this regard, the demonstrators condemned the crimes committed by the Israeli occupation against the Palestinian people, carrying Palestinian flags and flags of their own countries, as well as signs of disapproval of the occupation. They also called on the international community to assume its commitments and force the Israeli occupation to contain the attacks in the Gaza Strip, open the Rafah crossing, and allow the entry of aid. In this context, the Foreign Ministry of Pakistan condemned Israel's assassination of the Palestinian leader Ismail Haniyeh and offered its condolences to the family of the leader.
The assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the chief of the political bureau of Hamas in Tehran, was an act of dangerous escalation in an already volatile region and undermines efforts for peace. We express our condolences to his family and the Palestinian people. His killers must be held to account.
Furthermore, the Pakistani Foreign Ministry denounced that Israel has unleashed a campaign of terror and war crimes against the Palestinian population.
Since October 2023, Israel has unleashed a campaign of terror against the Palestinian people. Its war on Gaza and the inhumane siege in violation of international human rights and humanitarian law have resulted in misery, death, and destruction. These acts constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. We call upon the United Nations to uphold international law and to bring an end to the genocide of the people of Gaza.
And we stay on topic as Palestinian citizens claimed that Israel's attack represents a violation of Iranian national security and that the U.S. government is a complicit in these crimes.
This is a violation of Iranian national security, and I think events are leading to a regional war, and the U.S. administration will pay the price, because Washington gave the green light and the U.S. government is an accomplice in these crimes and the White House is managing this war, as the U.S. is giving orders to Netanyahu to continue, to send a message that there is no immunity for any leadership in the axis of resistance, nor for any country.
On the other hand, on Wednesday, Iran's permanent representative to the United Nations, Amir Sayed Iravani, condemned during a Security Council meeting the attack launched against Tehran in which Haniyeh, the leader of the Islamic resistance movement, was killed. The diplomat expressed that Iran condemns in the strongest possible terms this horrible terrorist act as the most serious violation of international laws and the UN Charter as a major violation of Iran's sovereignty and national security. In this regard, Sayed Iravani denounced that Israel regime had a political objective with this attack by disrupting the first day of operation of the new government. Likewise, he added that the aggressive act of terrorism requires immediate and effective measures by the UN. Meanwhile, the United Nations warned of a dangerous escalation of the conflict in the Middle East and insisted that new clashes must be avoided. In this sense, after Israel attacked the southern suburb of Beirut, Lebanese capital, and assassinated the Hamas leader in Iran, the UN urged restraint and to avoid actions that could further destabilize the Venezuelan area. The Secretary General of the organization, Antonio Guterres, called for maximum restraint and for all parties to avoid further escalation. Guterres also expressed deep concern following reports of the Israeli assassination on the Lebanese capital and reminded the parties of their duty to comply with their obligations under international law. On Wednesday, in the framework of the UN Security Council meeting, the Deputy Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine to the UN condemned the genocide perpetrated by Israel in the Gaza Strip and affirmed that the UN fails to its duty to impose a ceasefire.
Mr. President, it has been nearly 300 days since Israel launched its genocidal war on the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, a war that has gravely breached all tenets of international humanitarian and human rights law, a war that has flagrantly violated the UN Charter, including the cardinal principle regarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, a war that threatens international peace and security. Yet Israel is being permitted to wage this war in broad daylight with no restraints and no consequences. It is doing so willfully and wantonly, in spite of this Security Council's resolutions, in spite of the ICJ provisional measures orders, in spite of the global demands for a ceasefire. And still, the Council is failing its duty to impose a ceasefire and bring a halt to this depravity.
In this regard, the UN authority referred to the daily sufferings of the Palestinian population due to the war crimes committed by the Zionist regime.
Every day brings more horror, loss, and suffering for our people as Israeli occupying forces massacre Palestinian civilians, assassinate officials, kill humanitarian workers, medical personnel, and journalists, abduct civilians, and torture and rape them in Israeli jails, bomb and destroy Palestinian homes and infrastructure, and attack UN premises, including UNRWA schools, sheltering millions of forcibly displaced civilians who are being deliberately starved and denied access to medical care and the most basic needs for human subsistence and dignity by an occupier mercilessly chasing and hunting them down, repeatedly displacing them as they desperately search for safety in a place where no one and nowhere is safe.
Now we move on to other topics. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in an interview to French media on Wednesday, acknowledged that Ukraine, as well as other countries in the world, want Russia's participation in global peace forums on the current conflict. Zelensky assured that the majority of the world says that Russia must be represented at the second summit, otherwise they would not achieve significant results. He added that since everyone wants Russia to be at the table, they cannot oppose it. During the interview, Zelensky urged Beijing to force Moscow to cease the conflict and clarified that he would like China not to play a role of mediators, but to put pressure on Russia. And now we move on to other topics. On Wednesday, the U.S. Department of Defense said in a statement that Khalid Sayed Mohammed, accused of being the main perpetrator of the September 11th terrorist attacks in the United States, and 2 other accomplices agreed to plead guilty. The Pentagon revealed that Sayed Mohammed, Walid bin Attas, and Mustafa al-Hawsani have entered into prejudicial agreements with the Military Commission's supervisory authority, which terms are not available to the public at this time. Nevertheless, according to prosecutors' statements, the defendants accepted the deal in exchange for life imprisonment instead of the death penalty. The 3 defendants are expected to testify next week before the Military Commission at Guantanamo Bay base. We have a final show break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and also share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with teleSUR. Final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back from the South. The government of Colombia confirmed its intention to continue the dialogue with the National Liberation Army in order to fulfill the commitment to seek the protection of the civilian population. Representatives of the Colombian state expressed their interest in renewing the bilateral, national, and temporary ceasefire as a viable and necessary measure to avoid an escalation of the conflict in vulnerable areas. The officials expressed that they will make the necessary efforts to continue negotiations with the armed movement, but that the measure depends largely on the decision of the latter. The government statements come just after days before the deadline for the extension of the ceasefire that was signed in early February of this year. And on Wednesday, after the Bolivian authorities announced the existence of 57 blockade points in 5 departments, the president, Luis Arce, assured that the current national road blockade of long-distance transport has political purposes.
The coincidence of the mobilizations of those who have been behind the coup d'etat also had as a trigger this issue of heavy transport. And experience has always told us that, unfortunately, heavy transport has been a key player in all kinds of situations. This is not a novelty. You'll simply review the events before any political event in the history of the country and of others. It has always been like that, unfortunately.
In other news, after the winter judicial recess in Argentina, justice resumed on Wednesday the investigation of the attack suffered by former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner on September 1st, 2022, when she was shot in the head at the door of her home. The defendants are 3 members of the so-called Gang of the Copitos, Fernando Sabac Montiel, Brenda Uliarte, and Nicolás Carrizo. For the 4th hearing of the trial is expected the testimony of a private secretary of the former president, Diego Bermúdez, who was next to Fernández de Kirchner when Sabac Montiel shot at her with a Versa pistol. Bermúdez Bringue was the one who asked the custodians belonging to the federal police to remove the then vice president, but got no response. Also in Argentina, workers of the National Council for Scientific and Technical Research, the CONICET, gathered this Wednesday in front of the former ministry to protest against the situation and budget crisis sustained by the government of Javier Milei. They attributed to the Argentinian president the responsibility for the dismissal of almost 1,000 scientists who will lose their grants as of August. The General Secretary of the Association of Workers that Work for the Government said that they have 955 colleagues who competed last year and their appointments are still pending. According to those who mobilized, contrary to what was said by the presidency of the organization, the CONICET is in an emergency situation. Mexico's National Water Commission, CONAGUA, reported that this Wednesday Tropical Depression 3E intensified and formed Tropical Storm Carlotta in Pacific waters. The institution indicated that for now, Carlotta is not expected to make landfall in Mexico. However, it predicted that the cyclone will intensify to a hurricane in the next few days. The CONAGUA indicated that the tropical storm is beginning to intensify slowly. Its clouds bands are causing very heavy to occasionally heavy rains and winds with strong gusts in the states of Nayarit, Jalisco, Colima, and Michoacán on the Pacific coast. They added there will be high waves and possible formation of waterspouts on the coast of the aforementioned states. And in Brazil, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva sanctioned on Wednesday the Integrated Fire Management Bill to prevent and improve firefighting in the Pantanal and throughout Brazil. The environmental legislation was passed in Corumbá as part of the presidential tour over the affected areas. In this sense, the head of state stressed that he arrived in Corumbá, Mato Grosso do Sul, to sanction the law that establishes the national policy of integrated fire management, a fundamental policy to fight forest fires. The president also indicated that the Pantanal is a World Heritage Site and said he was proud of the work of the members of the brigade and IBAMA in fighting the fires in this biome. We go now to the Olympics. The Colombian women's national football team qualified for the first time in history to the quarterfinals of the Games. Although the Colombian team lost 0-1 to the Canadian national team in the third match of Group A of the women's soccer at Paris 2024 Olympic Games, it managed to get a place in the quarterfinals. The national team, which dominated the ball for most of the game and played the best soccer, advanced to the next round as one of the best third-place teams in the tournament on goal difference. The Colombian team, which scored 4 goals and conceded the same amount in the group stage, overcame Australia, which finished with -3 to reach the next round of the Olympics. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and also on TikTok. For TeleSUR English, my name is Belén de los Santos. Thank you for watching.